Have you ever completed a form online and then after you've clicked on the submit button, one of the fields turned red? There are many reasons for error messages when you complete online forms. The format could be wrong, but sometimes an error results when a field is empty or if a value is too long or too short. As a developer, you can use HTML and CSS to guide users to enter the correct data on forms and in this way save web server resources. In this video, you will learn more about the capabilities of client-side validation in HTML and how to use CSS to effectively alert users when data is incorrect. By now, you've learned about the different HTML input types and how they validate the format of data. But there are additional attributes that you can apply to elements for further validation. First, let's explore how you can ensure that the user provides a value to a form field. This example of a login form contains two fields, one for the username and one for the password. It also contains a submit button to submit the form. If a user hasn't added a username or password and clicks the submit button, the browser will allow the form to submit to the web server. But this is a waste of server resources. Because although the server-side validation will pick up the missing information and prevent the processing of the request, a HTTP request was still submitted. Let's improve this form by using client-side validation to ensure the user enters values to both fields. Now, with the required attribute in the code, if one of the fields is empty and the user clicks the submit button, the request will not be submitted to the web server. The web browser will focus on the first empty input element and inform the user that a field is empty. Now the form creates a much better user experience and prevents unnecessary usage of web server resources. But user input that is too short or too long would also result in unnecessary submissions to the web server. So another way to validate user input is to specify the required length for data. Let's say you want the usernames to be at least 3 characters long and a maximum of 12 characters. Or maybe you want to ensure more secure passwords by requiring a minimum password length of 5 characters. Fortunately, there are 2 more attributes you can use to ensure the correct length of data. You can add the min length and max length attributes to the fields to specify the required length. In this case, since the minimum value for the username is set to 3, a 2-character entry would be invalid. If you click the submit button now, the web browser will inform you of the length requirements. A built-in function of the browser will generate the message displayed on screen. Again, a much better user experience and management of web server resources. Now let's focus on the way the browser communicates errors to the users, like a form field that turns red when the data is invalid. This can be readily implemented using CSS. To highlight a field in red when the data is invalid, you use the input element selector. You then apply the pseudo class selector called invalid. You will learn more about pseudo class selectors later in this course. For now, the key thing to know is that they are used to select elements based on their state, such as whether the input data is valid or invalid. And then you add a CSS property to set the border of the element to red. But since all the form fields are empty when the form loads initially, their state is still practically invalid. This will cause all form fields to display red from the start, like demonstrated in this real-world example of a login screen. Ideally, you only want fields to appear red as the user enters invalid data. To do this, you need to apply another pseudo class called focus, which checks if the user is currently entering data into this field. Now the form will appear normal when the page first loads. And when the user starts inputting data, the field will turn red if the data is invalid. This video gave you a brief introduction to how you can use client-side validation and CSS pseudo-class selectors to improve the user experience of forms. As you learn more about JavaScript in other courses, you will be able to use even more advanced techniques to improve form validation.